If there's one fictional genre I have absolutely zero interest in, it's gotta be the cyberpunk subgenre, an offshoot of the already pretty saturated dystopian fiction genre that explores themes and ideas as riveting as late-stage capitalism, AI, and the sexual revolution. So when I won a Trepang Squared art contest a year or so ago, I assumed the only reason I actually selected Ghostrunner 1 as my reward was because the other options must have been pretty cruddy. And sure enough, when I eventually played it and made a video on it basically for the sole reason it used Unreal Engine, which meant I could rip the models from it, its story was about as generic a cyberpunk tale as they come, and I could barely even hide my own boredom sometimes while talking about it. The gameplay was serviceable, it held my attention well enough I guess, but all in all the game was a pretty forgettable experience I never really fell in love with. Then I played Ghostrunner 2, and things were a little bit different. In the year 2156, the Earth suffered the effects of an unspecified cosmic event that ejected overwhelming amounts of hazardous energy at the planet. This event, referred to as the Burst, wiped out entire ecosystems, caused a global blackout, and brought about a nuclear war. Humanity was on the brink of extinction, but luckily for them, Samsara Corporation's CEO Adam Hamada, an oligarch in charge of a massive aerospace corporation, had foreseen the events of the burst and years earlier begun construction of a gigantic shelter designed to house hundreds of thousands of people once the catastrophic event took place, a megastructure he named Dharma Tower. In the years after the burst's occurrence, while the world outside of Dharma Tower was empty and barren, humanity persisted within its vast cities, protected by Hamada's legion of Ghostrunners, specialized cyborgs created to protect the tower's inhabitants and maintain order. However, there was one person who would become very unsatisfied with Dharma Tower and greatly feared the idea of it becoming humanity's tomb instead of just a temporary shelter. A highly distinguished scientist named Mara, who also happened to be Adam's significant other. Mara became obsessed with the idea of returning to the world outside the tower and staged a coup against Adam, disabling his legion of Ghostrunners before killing him and plunging Dharma Tower into a state of chaos. While Mara and her scientists toiled endlessly in her laboratories at the top of Dharma Tower, experimenting on its inhabitants to try and devise a way to allow humanity to survive the inhospitable conditions of Earth's derelict atmosphere, her makeshift army of thugs and bandits she enlisted to replace the duties of Adam's Ghostrunners ruled the cities and lower districts of Dharma Tower with literal iron fists, abusing the tower's inhabitants and enforcing Mara's totalitarian rule. About 20 years into Mara's rule, a rebel group calling themselves the Climbers, who made it their goal to climb to the top of Dharma Tower to stop Mara, eventually found a broken down but still salvageable Ghostrunner and restored his functionality just in time before Mara's troops raided their hideout. The now repaired and very groggy Ghostrunner, after having been thrown to safety before Mara's troops could find him, awoke at the bottom of Dharma Tower and was welcomed back to life by none other than an AI recreation of Adam Hamada called the Architect, who was also lying dormant in the decades after Mara's coup, but now has an opportunity to take back control of Dharma Tower with the help of the newly revived Ghostrunner, who he identifies as GR74. Ghostrunner 1 follows the adventures of this last surviving Ghostrunner, GR74, and the Adam Hamada Architect AI as they battle their way to reach the top of Dharma Tower, where upon arriving and killing Mara, GR74 learns the truth about the Architect and Adam and everything the tower is predicated on. Dharma Tower is nothing but another tool for control, and Adam built it not necessarily as a way to keep humanity alive after the apocalypse, but to ensure that they would still be subservient to him even after the world ended, and he would always have like a working class to take advantage. You know the drill, it's a cyberpunk game. In the game's finale, the Architect attempts to take over GR74's half-human, half-cybernetic body to finally achieve a physical form, but in an act of defiance, GR74 therefore abandons his original title and mission to protect Adam and instead chooses to adopt the name the climbers gave him, killing the architect and announcing his name to be Jack. Ghostrunner 2 begins about 1 year after the events of Ghostrunner 1, with the player once again taking control of Jack the Ghostrunner, who is now no longer a force of rebellion but one of order again, working to clean up the chaotic gang-controlled streets that are still struggling with the effects of Mara's neglect. The climbers, having recuperated after their headquarters were attacked and they were all but wiped out in the first game, have now come together to form the Interface Council, and Jack is assisting them in their efforts to establish some degree of unified order, but unfortunately for them, the corrupt street gangs and heavily armed cults of Dharma Tower have now allied with 4 mysterious cyborgs called the Ashura, who wish to bring ruin to Dharma Tower for unknown reasons. The leader of the Ashura is a figure named Mitra, who over the course of the game is revealed to be the first blueprint for the Ghostrunner program, a cyborg created long ago from the human body of a man named Gygas. Gygas was a corporate spy apprehended by Adam Hamada's security personnel in the months leading up to Dharma Tower's completion, and seeing an opportunity to start running human trials for the Ghostrunner program, Hamada tortured and experimented on Gygas to eventually create GR0 Mitra. Even with Adam's brainwashing erasing most of Gygas's human memories within Mitra, he still retained his rage at what Adam had done to him and one day attempted to rebel against him alongside the other early Ghostrunners, who are also revealed to be the same Ashura that have declared war against Dharma Tower in the present day. However, Mitra's rebellion failed when the new Ghostrunner line, the same one Jack belongs to, defeated him and his immortal body was deactivated with a special protocol called Bushido, while the other 3 members of the Ashura were also taken out of the picture in one way or another. But now, with the death of the architect and Mara after Ghostrunner 1, Mira's Bushido has been disabled, he is very angry and evil, and he is now able to run amok again alongside his 3 cronies. And Ghostrunner 2 follows the adventures of Jack as he battles against them with the help of his Interface Council pals and even one of the Ashura themselves after he learns the truth about Mitra, which is that the Mitra we see today is not actually Gygas at all, but instead just a clone of him that has all the rage and vengeful hatred of the original Gygas inside of him still, but nobody left to dish it out on, since Adam and Mara are already dead, and thus this new Mitra clone of Gygas just wants to destroy Dharma Tower and end humanity. I guess maybe because he's mad at what it stands for? Well, anyway, Jack kills him, and that's the end of the game. Yeah, so the plot is nothing noteworthy in the slightest. It's at best serviceable and at worst confusing or contradictory. But the real storytelling meat of Ghostrunner 2 is not in its plot, but rather its premise and its oddly likable lineup of characters that kind of transcend the cyberpunk genre. However, I want to save that part for later because it's pretty juicy and part of kind of my through line for this video, so let's talk about the gameplay here instead. Now, Ghostrunner is very different from the usual games I play where I'm a soldier guy and I just run around and shoot people. Instead, now I'm a ninja guy and run around and stab people, which means, and even though it always feels kind of weird for me to say this, but Ghostrunner is actually a platformer game first and foremost. Now, I've always thought that making a good platformer probably actually wouldn't be as easy as you might think, since you need to be able to make the act of just moving around entertaining on its own, and you also need to implement very thoughtful level design to allow for it. Ghostrunner 2 understands and accomplishes this very, very well. The challenge isn't necessarily fighting the bad guy, it's getting over to him. Not only is the act of just moving around the place fun, to be reductive, combat is basically just traversal with some extra targets thrown in to make it interesting. So if traversal is fun and combat is basically just spiced up traversal, then mathematically the game is 100% fun. The running theme of Ghostrunner 2 is that, as any good sequel should, it takes the elements of the first game, updates them, adds to them, but most importantly makes them more accessible. So let's start with the movement. It's pretty basic, really. Jack's only movement ability of note is his little dash, which can be paired with his slide to perform a very fun technique I like to call dash sliding, where he'll slide while using the momentum from his dash. You can pair it with jumping to maintain your speed, and it can be made more easy to do if you bind the crouch key to a button on your mouse. Like if you have those little buttons on the side of your mouse, it is a cinch to do the dash slide with those, and it's just a blast. A really fun, simple simple movement technique that's going to be your bread and butter, letting you get up to speed whenever you please. One of my personal favorite things about Jack's movement though is that he's very sticky. You actually don't need any momentum to start a wall run. You can just jump onto a wall and he'll start running alongside it. He can't run straight up a wall, but he can basically scale one if you keep wall jumping off it, and you'd be surprised at what he's capable of wall running on. There were a ton of times where I thought I'd fallen off the level and died, but he would catch himself on something and I was actually able to run back up again to keep fighting. So all in all, the movement is simple, which means you'll never be making pretzels out of your fingers, and it's robust, so even if you don't have a million options for getting around, the ones you do have are very enjoyable. Combat-wise, there is one universal rule. Both Jack and enemies take only one hit each to kill. That means that if Jack gets hit with so much as a thrown pencil from an enemy, he dies, but that also goes for the enemies too. In Ghostrunner 1, that was really about it. Use the dash slide to build up some speed, traverse the environment over to an enemy, left click, and then move on to the next one. You could do a force push or chuck a throwing star if you wanted, but you were rarely ever truly encouraged to do that. In Ghostrunner 2, the combat system is much more robust and now plays much more heavily into traversal. Combat feels less like just doing platforming with some targets sprinkled around and much more like you now have actual options to deal with enemies besides just running over to them and pressing left click. Let's talk about the enemies first. They're all pretty rudimentary. You've got your basic gangsters with pistols, rifles, and melee weapons. Some of them have more interesting things like big lasers, hammers, or even their own ninja swords. But then you have a few more unique enemies like the flying guys, the kind of annoying cultist guys, and my personal favorite, the waivers. Waivers are these big robot dudes who during combat shoot out a big wave of killing juice, and I don't know why, but it's just so much fun to dash under the wave and slash right through them. I don't know, they're just memorable to me because every time I saw them, I knew I was going to be able to do something interesting. Plus, a pretty cool detail about them is in their appearance. They could have easily just carried over the model from the first game, but they actually changed it a little bit to show that the waivers have been taken in and repurposed by the gangs of Dharma Tower. Now they've been souped up a bit and they've got little holographic insignias on them. Neat. We'll come back to the art direction of the enemies later when we talk about the scions, but for now let's get back to the gameplay. With the new systems, everything has been made way more accessible than in Ghostrunner 1. Now, instead of in the first game where you had to carefully ration your 1 or 2 dashes that you were stuck with for 75% of the game until you got to the end where you could unlock 4 dashes if you were willing to give up all your other upgrades for it, Jack's got multiple dashes right from the start. They recharge very fast and they can be upgraded even further with the motherboard. And how about all the abilities? Let's take the throwing star for example. In the first game you barely got to use these during combat. Instead they were temporary pickups you'd find in certain levels that were more often than not actually used during puzzle sections. But in Ghostrunner 2 they're one of Jack's many standard abilities and they're balanced really well. Obviously if Jack could just chuck throwing stars at every single enemy he saw, they would be pretty overpowered, but you'll quickly learn that they're not that simple. Some enemies are actually capable of dodging 1 or 2 throwing stars, other enemies are capable of blocking them, but most interestingly, some enemies won't actually outright die to being hit by them and will instead become electrified, which then allows you to grapple over to them, an awesome mechanic that completely changes the way a combat encounter might go down. And plus, they're still used for traversal during platforming sections too. The Overlord ability lets you take over an enemy to fight for you for a brief moment. Very cool ability, making a return from Ghostrunner 1 and also unlocks way earlier. Tempest, the force push, cool as ever, doesn't often kill enemies but now knocks them down, incapacitating them, and it also has an upgrade that lets you do a super jump with it, very fun. The invisibility / hologram ability, simple on the surface, basically turns you invisible from enemies for a very short period, but also has an upgrade that lets you teleport with it. There's another motherboard upgrade for the dash that lets you fly backwards with it, not just a nice ability for getting out of tricky combat encounters, but can also help you with traversal in certain situations. Another upgrade that gives you speed boosts the higher your combo is. Then we've got Jack's blocking. Gone is the very finicky deflection ability from Ghostrunner 1. Jack's sword in Ghostrunner 2 is straight up just a lightsaber now. Hold to absorb projectiles, time your block to send them back towards their senders. Simple, accessible, and wonderful. The wingsuit, an amazing ability that while is frustratingly only usable in one single level, is an absolute blast every millisecond you get to use it. Billboards can be ripped down to crush enemies with, you can push heavy objects around with Tempest and maybe kill a few enemies that way. The underlying systems for combat are great too. When you kill the last enemy, the game does a slow-mo thing to let you know you're all done. Checkpoints place you right back to where you were just a second ago, so you never have to spend 10 minutes running back to where you died. There are these challenge kiosks in some of the levels that you can do to get extra upgrade currency, and while they're kinda hard to find, the ones I could play through were all really fun and the perfect mix of difficulty, and if they're too hard you can just skip them, no harm, no foul. The list goes on and on. The gameplay is just so thoughtful and free. You're never forced to go one way or the other. You can use the awesome new systems at your disposal or not. You can do some crazy Tempest Ghost Throwing Star combo, or you can just run up to a guy and chop him. It's all up to you. Plus, you can even see Jack's legs now. We're not even just a floating pair of arms anymore, so even more points for that too. However, in keeping with the spirit of being new and innovative, Ghostrunner 2 tried to do something very different from its predecessor and actually introduced an entire alternative gameplay system with the implementation of the motorcycle. About halfway through the game, there's a point where Jack raids a gang hideout and finds a superbike that he uses to chase after the escaping Mitra, who actually leads him outside of Dharma Tower itself during his pursuit. It's an awesome moment finally being outside for the first time, and when Jack reaches the bottom of the tower, the game really opens up quite a bit into this new half-linear, half-open world system where you drive the bike around to get across large distances and hop off of it to do other more normal puzzle and combat stuff. I've seen people criticize the bike for getting stuck on things all the time, but it'll only get stuck if you drive it off the road, which you're never actually specifically asked to do as far as I remember, so, you know, not to sound snobby or anything, but I never had a problem with that because I never thought to try and drive my ninja bike over a bunch of rocks. Instead, my major issue with the bike is this. Do you hear me? That's me trying to move my mouse. You can't look around on it. Jack can only look dead ahead while he's on the motorcycle, which not only doesn't make sense because he has a neck, it does definitely get frustrating at times when you just want to look around and see what you're doing. But really, aside from the inexplicable lack of a free look though, I really don't hate the bike. Whenever I was on it, I was entertained enough to not be constantly pining to be off of it, especially since there were definitely times I was on it where very entertaining things were happening. But we'll get to that in just a bit. Let's move on to the bosses. There are 5 main bosses in Ghostrunner 2. The 4 Ashura and a 5th boss we'll save for the end. Let's start with Ahriman, the brawn of the Ashura and the first boss of the game. This guy is really good. He's a very well-made starter / tutorial boss. Plus, it's pretty funny hearing him trash talking Jack like a pissed off older brother. The best thing about Ahriman's fight, however, is that Jack isn't alone during it. A character named Bakunin flies in to save him at one point, and the pair work together to take Ahriman down. And not just in a cutscene either, Bakunin actively helps in gameplay, and you can tell him to electrify Ahriman and you can grapple up to him to avoid attacks. It's just a really sick first boss fight and a great opening to the game. Now next up we have Rahu, who is actually less of a boss and more of like a whole entire level. You don't really fight him, he just kind of floats in the background as you deal with some platforming challenges. But he's alright as a boss, he's even better as a character, and his soundtrack is dope. Don't worry, we'll talk about the music more later. Third, we have Madhu the Dismantler, the engineer of the Ashura, who has one epic reveal before his boss fight. His design is very gnarly, and we'll talk about it later too. He has 3 health bars corresponding to each of his 3 heads, and if you listen closely, you'll hear he actually talks with 3 voices too, one of them sounding female, interestingly enough. And as you take out the health bars, you'll hear less of his voices. Very unique detail. Plus, his boss fight is really cool too. He's got 3 different fighting modes, a melee one, a summoning one, and a ranged one, and really he's just a great boss. Fourth, we have Mitra himself, the final boss of the game, and while he's far from terrible, he's really just a souped up version of Ahriman, the first boss, and every once in a while when you're fighting him, he'll bring you into the Cyber Void for a quick platforming section. Yes, we will discuss the Cyber Void later too, but the best thing about him, and something I haven't mentioned until now, is his voice actor, Roger Craig Smith, who, if you aren't aware, lends his voice to not just the single greatest hero shooter character ever made, but also one of the best single-player campaign protagonists of all time, Kyle Crane. Mitra is a total edgelord and as generic a villain character as they come, but he's got decent enough mechanics, stupendous voice acting, and thanks to the self-aware writing of Ghostrunner 2, he's more than serviceable as a final boss.
Nice moves. Where'd you learn that? GR retirement home?
But the true greatest boss of Ghostrunner 2 is the freaking worm. Oh my god, there needs to be a giant worm in everything from now on, okay? I don't know who at 505 Games watched Transformers before working on Ghostrunner 2, but they were right to do that. This thing is dope and hands down the coolest thing about the outside levels. Racing away from it on the bike is a blast, and there's this one part where you're in a canyon driving away from it and you can see its jaws on either side of you and hear it rumbling behind you. Oh, it's crazy! Its actual fight though is kind of butt cheeks a little bit. It's just a basic bike section with like buzzsaws and stuff, but dude, it's a giant robot worm! Anyway, so that's all I have for the gameplay. I mean, there's only so many ways for me to say it's really good. Performance is great, the game runs like a dream, moment-to-moment combat and traversal is splendid, it never once asks too much of you or tries to do any stupid, like, difficulty rug pulls. I mean, it's stupendous, top to bottom, and a massive improvement over the first game. I think if I had to summarize it, I would say that the design philosophy behind Ghostrunner 2 was not the question of how do we make this challenging, but instead how do we make this fun. Yes, the game is challenging, but the process of working to overcome each challenge is fun on its own. The fun comes before the challenge. We'll kind of circle back around to it towards the end of the video, but that's where I'm gonna leave it for the gameplay. For now, let's move on to the characters. We'll start with our intrepid and fully voiced protagonist Jack, the hero of the story and the only playable character in all of Ghostrunner 2. If you compare his appearance to his Ghostrunner 1 model, it actually serves as kind of a visual metaphor for the two games. Ghostrunner 1 Jack is kind of weedy looking, while Ghostrunner 2 Jack is visibly larger and heftier, indicating he's been given some upgrades by the climbers after the first game. And it's not just a visual difference either, Ghostrunner 2 Jack is f***ing brutal. If you block an attack from a melee enemy, you'll get a gnarly animation where he crushes their head with his hand or punches them in the face or does something he definitely wouldn't do in the first game. Usually I'm not into gore at all and I don't give points for it, but I very much like the change of Jack being much stronger and taking more of a direct role in combat instead of just being a little speed weasel like Ghostrunner 1 Jack. Plus, it also adds to his character, which is that he's kind of a self-aware, one-man army, invincible, badass protagonist, if you know what I'm saying.
Guess I'm just tough.
Now, Jack was always pretty cheeky. Even in the first game, he saw right through the architect's bullshit and let him know that right away, but he is still a weird pseudo-immortal cyborg ninja police officer Batman, and he does occasionally say some things more befitting of that description.
Why would the gang sit in the ugly parts?
To match their souls.
I gotta say, in hindsight, I really like that Ghostrunner 2 didn't try to go the route of exploring what Jack was like as a person before he became a Ghostrunner, if that's even how Ghostrunners work, which I think it is. That idea's been done before, especially in Cyberpunk stories, and it wouldn't have made any difference here. He's perfectly fine being just the hero. In addition, you may not think it first looking at him, but dialogue between Jack and other characters indicates he's not 100% cybernetic. He still has some quote-unquote meat in his body, he can smell things, and he has a brain. Jack's only hobby appears to be collecting trinkets that he finds, something he did in the first game that's now been canonized, and other characters will even become annoyed by it if he spends too much time away from an objective. All in all, he's an interesting fellow and a great protagonist. Can't ask for anything more really. He's not mopey, he's got no emotional baggage, he's really just enjoying himself, and he makes it hard not to enjoy everything along with him.
Creepy.
I like it.
Now next we'll discuss the members of the Interface Council, which would be more aptly named as the Interface Friend Group for reasons I'll make clear eventually, but regardless. First up we have Connor, who is introduced in the beginning of the game as sort of the de facto leader of the Interface Council, with his primary goal being getting all the bozos of Dharma Tower in line so they can set up a government. He's a little full of himself and can be a bit of a knob, but he's funny, and as the game goes on, he's actually built up to be a potential turncoat spying on the other members of the Interface Council. but then a cutscene happens about a quarter through the game where he gets his head chopped off by Mitra. It's quite an interesting development, and even if Connor wasn't around for long and there isn't much else to say about him, he fit into the world perfectly and he went out in a pretty gnarly fashion. Next up we have Butch and Victor, two Interface Council soldiers who guard the organization's headquarters. These guys are pretty funny. Every time you load into the hub world they say something about the events of the game or make a reference to something else, and one time they even have a small conversation about Jack himself.
Does he piss?
Say what?
Have you ever seen him go?
No. Have you?
I don't think so, no.
Maybe he's got a shy bladder.
A killer cyborg with a shy bladder. Do you hear yourself?
It's nothing crazy, but it just makes the game feel that much more alive, like these two dudes are real people assigned to stand around in this room all day and they pass the time chatting about stuff. Then we have Saul, who is like the medical dude of the Interface Council. This guy doesn't do much. He actually never talks over Jack's radio to my knowledge and just chills in the headquarters all day tinkering on stuff. He was first mentioned in a voice line in the first game, so I guess it's interesting to see him show up here in the sequel. Saul's an alright guy, and even if I don't really have anything noteworthy to say about him, I think he's good enough as just another friendly face on the list. Next we have Bakunin, who if you remember is the guy who flies in and saves Jack during the Hourman fight. Remember how I said in Ghostrunner 1 Mara basically used the gangs of Dharma Tower as her police force to keep control over the lower class workers? Well, this guy was apparently their reluctant leader in a sense. I guess he was with Adam before Mara killed him and then he just kind of stuck around. I don't know, everyone is initially skeptical about him when he first joins the Interface Council, but he's a nice dude. I actually thought he died at one point just before the Dismantler fight, but he must have pulled a Palpatine somehow because he shows up in the headquarters again afterwards. Either way, I like Bakunin, he's always trying to help out. Next we have Zoe, making a return from Ghostrunner 1 where she never actually made a physical appearance to my knowledge and only served as Jack's Cortana. She was really the only friendly voice Jack had in the entire game, and just like the rest of the game, she was serviceable but maybe a little bit too cyberpunk. She spent a lot of time whining about the oppression and fighting the power and everything else, but I'm happy to say in Ghostrunner 2 she's improved quite a bit. Instead of being just a last survivor like in the first game, she's now much more of a leader figure and spends much more time talking about actually interesting things. Overall, she's far better here than her original iteration and plays her part as Jack's closest friend just fine. Now lastly we have Kira, who is undoubtedly the most entertaining character in the entire game. I'm not really sure where to begin with her. I've heard people say she's the one who writes Jack's artifact entries, and she has a pet robot named Kevin, but she may very well be a little bit evil. At the start of the game, Kira is not a member of the Interface friend group and was originally a part of Mara's science team. She even knew Bakunin at one point when the two of them still worked for Mara, but one day they both quit, and from that point on, before the events of the game, she seems to have just spent most of her time hanging around in virtual reality. She's first discovered by Jack after he essentially turns off her Wi-Fi and forces her to leave her house, and after moving over to the headquarters, Kira begins assisting Jack in his adventures, even being able to communicate with him while he's traveling the lands outside Dharma Tower thanks to her signal boosting skills. All things considered, she's a pretty nice lady, frankly. Even when Jack is invading her privacy, she's just sort of annoyed and almost impressed at his ability to circumvent her security systems, but without a doubt, her most prominent quality is her unbridled curiosity. I'm fairly certain Kira is the most talkative character in the game and is a massive step up from Ghostrunner 1 Zoe as Jack's main Cortana. She's the only character on Jack's radio during the outside levels, and instead of just telling him what to do or discussing the latest happening in the plot, she asks him a ton of very personal questions. It's really interesting stuff. She's clearly and very understandably fascinated with Jack and asks him all kinds of things, like if he ever gets tired, if he likes killing people, if he's ever regretted killing anyone, what he dreams about, if he even dreams at all, and my personal favorite, what he does for fun.
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
What?
Oh, you don't watch classics? Do you even watch anything at all?
No.
Seriously? Not even like superhero stuff? Cooking shows? Anime? What do you do for fun? Do you even do fun?
I sit quietly, alone.
Fun.
But that's not quite all there is to say about Kira. Remember how I said earlier she was a part of Mara's science team, the villain from the first game, and how Mara's whole motivation as a villain is that she wanted humanity to be able to move out of Dharma Tower back onto the surface of Earth? Yeah, well, the result of their efforts in trying to do that were these things. They're called creeps, and they're terrifying, mindless human-robot hybrids who I wouldn't consider to fall under the umbrella of humanity anymore, but they can actually breathe the irradiated air outside. Anyway, Kira helped make those out of the inhabitants of Dharma Tower, and when she sees the scions, she's actually filled with wondrous intrigue instead of profound disgust, and hates to see Jack putting them out of their misery because she wants to study them. There's just never a dull moment with Kira. She's out of her mind, and I really don't know if I'd feel the same way about this game if she wasn't in it. So that's really it. That's the main roster for Ghostrunner 2, and I'd say Jack and his pals thoroughly proved that a game can have a lame plot and good characters at the same time. Which brings me to another aspect of Ghostrunner 2's story, its surprisingly likable world. Now this is the topic that I've been wanting to get to for a while now, but before I can get into how the game transcends cyberpunk, first, I want to lay everything out. There are only 5 different kinds of environments in Ghostrunner 2. The neon-soaked cities of Dharma Tower, the scorched, arid wastelands of the Earth's surface, the mind-bending and impossible visualized data structures of the cyber void, the upper levels of Dharma Tower's exterior, and Robot Church. Yep, hang on, we'll get to it in a second. We'll start, of course, with the cities, which are very faithful to the cyberpunk city aesthetic that we've all known for 40 years now. Blue, pink, big advertisements, nothing new here visually, but we do still have a pretty impressive level of detail. I guarantee that even when you're moving at breakneck speeds, you'll never not have something to look at. An issue I have with the cities of Dharma Tower, however, are that they are very clearly just video game levels, you know what I mean? Like, these places don't make any sense architecturally, and it isn't helped by the fact that the city more often than not looks like a city, but doesn't really feel like one. Jack will never see another living soul in the entire game outside of the hub world besides just the enemies. The only indication you get that ordinary people live in Dharma Tower are flying cars and lit up windows off in the distance, which I do suppose is still better than the first game since I don't recall seeing any cars in Ghostrunner 1, but I do personally wish there was just a bit more life to the place. Next we have the church area. By the events of Ghostrunner 2, in Dharma Tower there has emerged a cult of citizens who follow the Ashura and worship Rahu. Now, I've said before in previous videos that I am absolutely sick of video game church. I have been to space church and medieval church and modern church in video games probably more times than I've been to it in real life. But in all fairness, I cannot say I have been to robot church before, so I suppose I can give maybe half a point for originality. Plus, the scale here is really mesmerizing. It is absolutely vast. But I just have one question. Who the f built this place? When they were making Dharma Tower like 200 years ago or whatever, did they say, oh yeah guys, by the way, we're putting in Robot Church down here? And if it was the cultists who built it, how? How did they fit the giant robots down here? Where did they come from, and how did they build the windows? Is that light coming from outside? Did they like break holes through the wall? I don't know, but frankly, I honestly kind of prefer Robot Church over the tired neon lights of the cities, but not by a huge amount. And once again, we have the same problem that this is obviously just a video game level and not a real place where people live. Now, outside of Dharma Tower, the surface of Earth is actually very fittingly lifeless and eerie. Madhu has been busy out here, amassing his army of undead scions, and his constructs appear to be consuming and spreading throughout the wastelands. Seeing these enormous machines and these strange metallic towers set against the brown, windy dust makes for some pretty cool visuals. Not to mention being able to always always see Dharma Tower through the clouds no matter where you are is really sick too, and its scale is absolutely mind-boggling. Looking at it from outside, it is very easy to believe that all the other environments can fit in there. Pair that with the tremendous soundtrack that I have finally given myself a chance to mention, and I always found myself deeply immersed in the experience of playing through the outside levels. I understand that these levels draw a lot of criticism from GR1 OGs who rightfully comment on how they break up the traditional runner gameplay loop of Ghostrunner with a more non-linear style, and while there isn't an absolute ton to do outside of Dharma Tower, between the cool Transformer worm visuals, the swift speed of the bike, and Kira saying something batshit insane every 5 seconds, I was definitely never bored when I was out here. The fourth environment of Ghostrunner 2 is the ominous and limitless Cyber Void, brought back from Ghostrunner 1. Now the Cyber Void is Ghostrunner 2's version of the visualized computer logic trope that I've also already seen before in like The Matrix and something else probably. It's supposed to be what Jack sees when he's plugged into a computer, and apparently humans see the Cyber Void very differently than he does. The Cyber Void is sprinkled periodically throughout the game, and it's fun. It's got some of the best platforming in the game in my opinion, and it can also do more unique stuff like low gravity, weird objectives, and whatever this is, because it doesn't need to adhere to the laws of reality. And lastly, we have the exterior upper levels of Dharma Tower, which are only experienced in the final 2 levels of the game, and frankly, it's my favorite environment in all of Ghostrunner 2. I absolutely love flying above the peach-colored clouds and looking down at the ruined skyscrapers below, and it's really the only area in the entire game that doesn't need to be original. It's not a cyberpunk city or a cyberpunk church, it's just a cool high-altitude setting. There's no cyberpunk to it whatsoever, and it's just a nice release. In terms of atmosphere, Ghostrunner 2 carries itself pretty far with its amazing soundtrack. I actually don't recall any songs ever becoming ear-grating, even as my death toll climbed to the triple digits on some levels, and I spent 15-20 minutes straight listening to the same song. The cities of Dharma Tower are always accompanied by the lyricless harmonies of synthesizers, the church's echo with an unusual but unique blend of electronic and hymnal chants, and ominous drums and beats can be heard all throughout the wastelands. It's a stupendous soundtrack, and I'd play some of my favorites, but that'd add unnecessary time to the video, and frankly the best thing I can say is to just recommend you go listen to it for yourself. It's free right here on BoobTube. Whatever you do though, don't turn the music off while playing, because if you do, all you'll be left with is the game's ambient soundscape, which actually does leave quite a bit to be desired. Here we go again with that looking like a city but not feeling like a city issue. It sounds like I'm standing next to my refrigerator right now instead of by a high-rise window in a bustling metropolis. Regardless, the one other aspect about Ghostrunner 2's world I'll share before I wrap up this video with the final section is its artifacts and audio logs. Just like in Ghostrunner 1, Jack will often get sidetracked on his missions and wander off to find himself some little trinkets to take home with him. And each artifact or audio log you pick up divulges a bit more info about the history of the game's world. Nothing too extensive, you won't be sitting there listening or reading about underwear for 20 minutes, but the artifacts are still pretty neat and they're very inoffensive. But yeah, that's the environments and collectibles. I already explained the history of the Ghostrunner universe with the burst and Dharma Tower's construction and whatnot, but that's not quite all there is to say about the world of Ghostrunner 2, which finally brings me to the whole transcendence of the subgenre thing I was talking about earlier in the video. So now we have officially arrived at the, and I hate to use this term, but we're at the actual video essay part, guys. So now as I talk, you can imagine me sitting in a fancy chair with a monocle and a pipe blabbering about video game thematic elements. Alrighty, here we go. Okay, to begin, I want to try and define what exactly cyberpunk is, because my whole dilemma here, as I said like 40 minutes ago, is that I don't like Cyberpunk, but I like Ghostrunner too, so how is that possible? Well, as I said in the intro, Cyberpunk is a subgenre that, as I would define it, centers around the idea of advanced technology being way too closely integrated into the human experience, and often brings along with it additional themes about the misuse of this technology, including but not limited to mass surveillance, body modification, and rampant AI. Doesn't sound too bad, right? Well, that's only the cyber part, the sci-fi stuff, the good stuff. However, Cyberpunk also always finds time for what I consider to be far less interesting themes, including but not limited to unrestrained corporatization, the oppression of the masses, and free love. Now, do you guys remember back in like the late 2000s, early 2010s, there was this weird modern sci-fi military movie and video game craze where everything needed to have exosuits or drones or maybe a few aliens? It had themes about the military industrial complex and like national security stuff, and after like 3 or 4 years when it ran its course and everybody got tired of it, it went on its merry way. Can that please happen already with the cyberpunk genre? How is everybody still so enraptured with the same neon lights and strip clubs that have served as the most formulaic aesthetics for 40 years now? Not to mention how outdated the whole thing is. Give me a break, guys. We're not getting flying cars in the future. We're getting subscription-based light switches. Trepang Squared barely showed us any of what the world outside of its levels looked like, and it still did a better job at portraying what an actual near-future dystopia would look like than any cyberpunk setting ever did. It's all just gonna be Amazon. But regardless, my initial hypothesis was that most people actually really aren't all that interested in what makes cyberpunk cyberpunk. I would hope that the vast majority of people don't give that much of a shit about mohawks and STDs and instead want to see the cool stuff, the ninja cyborgs and the robot arms. But again, my question becomes this then: if what we're all really interested in is not the punk of cyberpunk, but instead the cyber stuff, then why do people still show interest in this incredibly formulaic genre and keep making movies and games for it instead of just making something fully sci-fi? Now, hold on, let me take a puff of this pipe. I was having a conversation with my brothers about the topic, and even though they are huge cyberpunk fans, I was able to get them to understand my perspective using logical reasoning, and they ended up agreeing with me fully. They did not, and they're gonna hate that I even said that, but anyway, one of them actually made a really good point. I was talking about how I didn't like cyberpunk, and we were bickering about what is and isn't a cyberpunk game because, again, like I said earlier, what I believe separates a cyberpunk game from just being a sci-fi game are the punk themes, the stuff about capitalism and uprising and the sexual revolution. But then one of them said, "But wait, oh wise one," his words, not mine, "have you considered Half-Life 2? I took a moment to think. Half-Life 2 was another game I enjoyed, and upon reflection, although I've never seen it described as one, I did indeed realize that Half-Life 2 has all the hallmarks of a cyberpunk setting. Oppression, sci-fi elements, mass surveillance, and uprising, and even themes about sexual liberation. I was enlightened. Maybe I don't actually hate those themes of the cyberpunk genre simply for what they are. Here, Half-Life 2 was, with the concept of a dystopia being actually horrifying instead of overly dramatic, a rebellion coming across as noble and determined instead of wishy-washy and petulant, and the idea of sex actually being an act of principled defiance and a celebration of life instead of just mindless pleasure? How did Half-Life 2 pull it off? Is it truly cyberpunk? Well, I'm really not sure I can answer that, but what I do know is that Half-Life 2 framed these cyberpunk themes in a new way. Instead of the dystopia being the result of companies wanting to make more money, it's the product of an interstellar evil deliberately dehumanizing and controlling humanity to serve their incomprehensible goals. goals. Instead of the rebellion being a bunch of edgy, hot topic, renegade, teenage anti-heroes, the rebels are actual real people, like soccer moms and desk jockeys picking up guns and fighting the power, not just for the sake of fighting the power, but because they'd rather die standing. But most importantly, sex is not a basic commodity to be bought and sold. It's a beautiful miracle of biology, and as corny as it sounds, it's the notion that love will always prevail. By the way, if anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about with the sex liberation thing, it's when the rebels take the combine pregnancy suppression field thing down and people can f again to save the human race. Now, on that last point, I know that a lot of cyberpunk stories say they're trying to show the consequences of sex becoming a basic commodity when it's consumed by capitalism or whatever, but honestly, strip clubs and sex bots and porn billboards are so commonplace in these cyberpunk settings, I would argue at this point they're not even trying to say anything about it anymore. It's not condemnation, it's straight up just indulgence now, but regardless, that's up for interpretation. Let's get back on track. The point I'm trying to make here is that my brother was right. The themes present in Half-Life 2 literally are beat for beat the exact same ones you see in cyberpunk movies, but they're implemented in a way that's so meaningful that people don't even recognize them as being cyberpunk themes anymore. It's the punk without the punk. There is no rebellion for the sake of rebellion. There's no mohawks or teeth gnashing at the corporations. It's the themes and ideas of cyberpunk evolved into something refreshing and new instead of just using the same exact visual shorthand from a 40-year-old movie. So how does Ghostrunner 2 fit into all this? Does it too evolve the themes of the cyberpunk subgenre? Absolutely. Now, obviously, it's not nearly as innovative as Half-Life 2 was in that regard, but let me tell you what the magic of Ghostrunner 2's world and its characters is. They're post-cyberpunk. In Ghostrunner 2, the uprising is over. The rebels have actually won, and the game explores what it would be like for them to pick up the pieces that's left over. We're not fighting the power anymore. We're fighting its old, shambling remnants. It's an awesome and simple premise, and there's just such a huge weight lifted off the world's shoulders. But the best aspect about the post-cyberpunk angle are the characters. Never in my life did I ever think I could like a bunch of characters from a cyberpunk setting, but I really like the gang from Ghostrunner 2. They're not stupid, morally complex anti-heroes. They're just a bunch of scrappy good people. They're not fighting the system anymore. They're trying to fix the frickin' thing. And they talk like actual human beings instead of lacing every word they say with self-righteous anti-establishment rhetoric. Really, the characters come off as just a bunch of friends going on an adventure together. Gone is the oppression and the rainy, mopey misery of cyberpunk settings where everything has to be some big statement about how the world works. The Interface Council faces issues as real as funding problems, a lack of manpower, and somebody shitting all over the men's room again. Nobody's waxing philosophical about human nature. This is a f***ing video game where you play as Robot Ninja Batman and it acts like it. It just wants you to have fun. And that's what I get from Ghostrunner 2. It's all nothing but love, from the gameplay to the world to the characters to the frickin' ninja robot riding away from a giant robot worm on a future superbike. You can't have a bad time playing it. I love Ghostrunner 2, it loves me, and it loves you. And that's it, guys. That's where I'm gonna leave it for this video. I apologize that last part especially was very low effort. I didn't even bother to make the background footage match up to what I was saying because I just have to get this video out the door for reasons I'll explain in just a moment. But if I in any way rustled some feathers with that cyberpunk talk, I'd urge you to leave a comment. I read all of them. Now, before I close it out here though, I do have to say some things about the current state of the channel and where I'm headed. Now, I've been wanting to make this Ghostrunner 2 video for a long time now. I really only made that video on Ghostrunner 1 so I could talk about Ghostrunner 2, and I'm glad to have finally had the opportunity. I still definitely didn't cover all my bases, and I didn't talk about everything I wanted to talk about, and I didn't even do like an intro animation or anything because there are going to be some changes coming to the way we do things here at FMP. So with the last video, the SCP-5K review, and now this one, loyal viewers will have noticed a switch in the kind of videos I've been making. Instead of just basic story summaries, I'm now going to be getting much more analytical with the games I'll be talking about. I want to kind of move off into a kind of review channel for the time being, and I even have plans to eventually explore topics outside of video games like TV shows or maybe even something else entirely. However, I wanted to finish up this Ghostrunner 2 video as soon as possible because of 3 main reasons, which I will share with you now. Number 1, I am pretty busy with schoolwork this semester, and I'm going to be again next semester, but more importantly, I've actually taken on some creative side projects besides just BoobTube. I'm actually trying to learn to draw, believe it or not, and I'm also dipping myself into Unreal Engine a little bit for a game design class I'm taking, which means that my free time will no longer always be spent just making BoobTube videos as it had been before. Number 2, I've got some big life changes coming up. I'm going to be moving out of the house and wrapping up college here in not too long from now, and as much as I would love to be able to make videos full time for you guys as my job, my latest videos have been averaging maybe only a few billion views each, and unfortunately those numbers are just not enough to allow me to do that. That being said, video frequency will likely become even slower down the line, but as I've also said many times before, I will probably never stop making YouTube videos for as long as I live. People get concerned sometimes that I'm going to get burnout, but I've actually been making videos for years now non-stop. The process is so engaging to me that I don't even think I've ever once seriously considered not working on a video, no matter how little views I get for how long it takes to make one. Which brings me to reason number 3, which is that the next video I'm going to make is gonna be a big one. It's going to be about a game I have been playing for literal years now, and I have a lot of things to say about it. Unfortunately, the game uses a different engine than the one I'm used to working with, and because I simply cannot make this video without being able to pick the game apart, it's going to be a bit of a process as I teach myself how to extract the models, how to use a free cam and all that stuff. I'm gonna have to take my time with it, and I will even be enlisting the help of some buddies of mine to help. They have some things they want to say about the game too, and hopefully I'm gonna be able to hand the mic over to them for certain areas. Honestly, it might not actually take that long to make the video, and I'm not even sure what angle I want to really take with it yet, but I figure I'd say something here because I'm actually kind of back to when I first started my channel. When I first started making BoobTube videos however many years ago, I only did it to get more mileage out of the games I played and would drag out the video making process for as long as possible so I'd always have something to do. There was no incentive at all to make money or get famous or anything, but when Trepang Squared rolled around and got me some subs, I rode the wave for as long as I could before I literally ran out of stuff to say about it. Ever since my last Trepang video, the views on my channel have really sort of dried up quite a bit. That chapter's over and not as many people are watching my non-Trepang stuff, so what do I do? Well, if you've watched this far, I've still got you guys who appreciate my long-form stuff. I want to say you are a true point pal, and you guys are the ones I make these long special videos for. So now, since it's all about you instead of the views and my own entertainment, what I'm gonna do now is I want to try and make something extra special for you. Gonna try and go back to my roots a little bit, make some animations, show off some models, but most importantly, take my time. Even more time than usual, that is. Again, I'm never gonna stop making videos, but I just thought I'd say here there might be a bit of a wait for the next one. If you're on my Patreon, I want to say that I love you, and if I become a billionaire, I'll remember and come back for each and every one of you guys. But like, in the interest of being transparent, just want to let you guys know that's where I'm at right now with the channel. So thank you all again for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back as soon as I can.